You won't believe what happened to my little girl, and honestly, even now as I sit down to tell you this story, my hands tremble just remembering the pain and the betrayal. Before I dive deep into everything, make sure you hit that subscribe button, because stories like these deserve to be heard, not just for me, but for every parent who has felt powerless when their child was hurt. Now, imagine the innocence of a little girl, barely old enough to understand the cruel things people are capable of, walking into a room full of laughter only to come out of it with her precious hair scattered across the floor. I never thought someone could be so heartless, especially someone who smiled in our faces, pretended to care, and then decided to leave permanent scars, not just on my daughter's head, but on her heart. The day it happened started out so ordinary that it almost feels like the universe was trying to lull us into a false sense of security before dropping a storm we weren't prepared for. The morning sunlight filtered in through the blinds, painting golden stripes across the floor where my daughter's dolls were lined up neatly. She was humming to herself, twirling her curls and her tiny fingers, the way kids do when they're content in their own world. And then she told me she was going to spend some time with her favorite person, someone we trusted like family. I let her go, never knowing that just hours later, she would come running back to me, eyes swollen with tears, her little scalp showing in patches because someone decided to strip her of something so personal. When I first saw her, I froze. I couldn't even process what I was looking at. Her once bouncy, shiny hair was hacked off unevenly, some parts shaved so close to the skin that it looked deliberate. She was clutching the edges of her shirt, her lips quivering as she tried to speak, but before a single word could come out, she broke down completely, burying her face against me. And then, as if that weren't enough, the person responsible dared to make a cruel comparison, smirking and saying she looked just like her father, as if that excused anything, as if mocking the resemblance was some twisted way to laugh at the damage they caused. In that moment, a storm of emotions tore through me: rage, disbelief, sorrow, and I knew this wasn't just about hair. It was about dignity, trust, and the very soul of my child, who now looked at herself in the mirror and wondered why someone she loved so much would hurt her this way. I remember holding her in my arms, rocking her gently as if she were still a baby, whispering to her that everything was going to be okay, even though my own heart was breaking into pieces. When you see your child hurt in such a cruel, senseless way, you don't just feel sadness. You feel fire in your veins, an uncontrollable need to protect, to lash out, to demand answers. I tried to keep calm for her sake, but inside, I was shaking, my thoughts racing in circles. Who could do this? Why would they do this? How could someone take scissors to a little girl's head as if her feelings didn't matter? And then to stand there, laughing, comparing her bald patches to her father, as if that joke would somehow soften the cruelty. It was sickening. I wanted to scream at the top of my lungs, but all I could do in that moment was wipe away her tears and tell her she was still beautiful, that nothing could ever take away her worth. But the truth is, children don't always believe words. Not when they've been humiliated, not when they've seen their reflection and it no longer matches the joy they once carried. That evening, as I tucked her into bed, she clutched a scarf around her head, refusing to let me pull it away. "Mommy," she whispered, "do I look ugly now?" My heart shattered into a million pieces because no child should ever have to ask that question. I told her over and over again that she was perfect, that her beauty came from her heart, her smile, her laughter. But I could see the doubt settling in her eyes, the kind of doubt that burrows deep and doesn't leave easily. Meanwhile, the person who had done this kept justifying their actions, claiming it was just hair, that it would grow back, that I was overreacting. But they didn't understand, or maybe they didn't care, that it wasn't about the hair at all. It was about betrayal, about the cruelty of making a child the target of some twisted joke, about stripping her confidence in one single afternoon. And as I sat there watching my daughter fall asleep with dried tears on her cheeks, I made a silent promise. I would not let this go. I would fight for her dignity. I would make sure this person never had the chance to hurt her again, and I would remind my daughter every single day that her worth was unshakable. This wasn't just about hair. This was about love, about standing up when someone you trust crosses a line, and about teaching my daughter that even in the face of cruelty, she could rise stronger than ever before. The next morning, when the sun peeked through the curtains, I woke up before my little girl did. I stood quietly by her bedside, watching her breathe softly, clutching the scarf she had wrapped tightly around her little head, even in her sleep. My chest ached with both love and fury. Love because she was mine, my little miracle who deserved nothing but protection, and fury because someone had ripped away her innocence for the sake of a cruel laugh. When she finally stirred awake, her first instinct wasn't to stretch or smile like she usually did. Instead, she immediately reached up to make sure her head was covered. That tiny gesture spoke louder than words, and I knew then that the wound left behind wasn't just physical. It was emotional, a scar that might take years to heal. I tried to coax her out of bed with a promise of pancakes, her favorite breakfast, but even as she sat at the table, her shoulders were hunched, her eyes downcast, as though she didn't want the world to see her anymore. And that was when I realized that the cruelty she endured had stolen more than her hair. It had stolen her confidence. Throughout the day, family members called, asking why she wasn't picking up, why she sounded so quiet when they did get through. I made excuses, saying she was tired, but inside I was seething. And then the person responsible had the audacity to come by, acting as if nothing had happened, as if they hadn't turned my child's world upside down. They stood in my kitchen, smiling casually, repeating the same mocking words about how she looked just like her father now. That phrase burned into my ears, not because comparing her to her father was inherently bad, but because of the sneer behind it, the cruel intention to make light of what they had done. I confronted them, my voice shaking not from fear but from the sheer force of holding back everything I wanted to say. I asked them how they could take scissors to a child's head without permission, how they could sit there and laugh while my little girl cried. Their response? A shrug. A careless shrug, as if I was making a mountain out of a molehill. And that's when it hit me, they didn't regret it. They didn't even see it as wrong. To them, it was just a joke, something that would blow over. But to me and my daughter, it was a violation, a wound, a memory that would haunt us every time she touched the bare skin where her curls used to be. That night, when I tucked her in again, she whispered, "Mommy, can you promise me no one will ever cut my hair like that again?" And I promised with every ounce of my being that I would protect her, that I would make sure her trust in the world wasn't completely broken. And deep down, I began planning, not for revenge in the cruel sense, but for justice, for accountability, for a way to show her that love is stronger than mockery and that no one, absolutely no one, has the right to strip her of her dignity. The days that followed were some of the hardest I have ever faced as a parent. Every morning when my daughter woke up, she reached for a hat or scarf before even brushing her teeth, as though hiding herself had become the new routine. I could see her shrinking into the background at school, no longer volunteering to answer questions, no longer laughing as freely with her friends. Children notice everything, and though some tried to comfort her, others whispered and giggled, their curiosity sometimes cutting deeper than they realized. I sat in my car one afternoon, waiting for her after school, and when she walked toward me with her backpack slung low and her scarf pulled tight around her head, I saw it in her eyes. She felt smaller, as though she had lost a part of herself. And that broke me in ways I can't even explain. That evening, I decided it was time to stop pretending that things would heal on their own. I sat her down and told her stories about women who had faced hardships, about how hair, while precious, did not define their strength, their beauty, or their future. I showed her pictures of survivors, of women who had shaved their heads proudly, of girls who wore their scars like crowns. Slowly, I could see a flicker of something return in her gaze, a small spark that told me she was listening, that she wanted to believe me. But healing isn't instant. Even as I poured love into her, the wound stayed raw. Meanwhile, the person responsible continued to show no remorse. They even made snide comments in front of others, laughing about how kids bounce back quickly and how people like me were too sensitive. Each word was like salt on an open wound, and it pushed me closer to a breaking point. I knew then that this wasn't just about personal pain. It was about standing up against cruelty disguised as humor. So I confronted them again, but this time I didn't go in shaking with rage. I went in steady, strong, fueled by the need to show my daughter what it means to protect yourself with dignity. I told them plainly that they would never be allowed near her again, that their actions had consequences, that they had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. Their face shifted, their casual smirk faltering for the first time, and in that moment, I realized they hadn't expected me to push back. They thought I would stay quiet, that I would let it slide. But no parent should ever let such cruelty slide. Later that night, as I tucked my daughter in again, she looked up at me and said, "Mommy, you were so brave today." And I held her hand and whispered, "No, sweetheart, you're the brave one. You're the one who will rise from this stronger than ever." And though the pain hadn't vanished, though the road to healing was still long, I knew then that together, we would find a way to turn this wound into a lesson of resilience, love, and unshakable self-worth. Weeks passed, and slowly but surely, my little girl began to rediscover pieces of herself that had been buried under shame and hurt. I made it my mission to pour every ounce of love into her life, to remind her daily that her worth was not tied to the curls she once twirled in her fingers. We experimented with fun scarves, colorful hats, even bold little headbands that made her smile when she caught her reflection in the mirror. But what mattered most wasn't the accessories, it was the confidence she started rebuilding inside. One morning, as she prepared for school, she surprised me by leaving her scarf behind. "I don't care if they laugh, Mommy," she said with a trembling but determined voice, "because I know I'm still me." I could barely hold back tears as I hugged her tight, proud beyond words of the courage shining in her young heart. At school, some kids still whispered, but others rallied around her, and slowly she realized that true friends look past appearances. And as for the one who caused all of this, their laughter eventually turned hollow when they saw their actions had no power over us anymore. They tried to shrug it off again, but the community saw through them, saw the cruelty they tried to disguise as humor, and they found themselves isolated, their words no longer carrying the weight of authority or charm. Justice doesn't always come in courts or punishments. Sometimes it comes in the quiet strength of those who rise above, in the refusal to be broken by someone else's cruelty. One night, as we sat together before bed, my daughter asked if I thought her hair would grow back. I brushed my hand over her soft scalp and said, "Yes, sweetheart, it will, but even if it didn't, you'd still be the most beautiful girl in the world." She smiled for the first time in weeks without hesitation, and in that smile, I saw healing take root. This journey was never just about hair. It was about betrayal, resilience, and a reminder that even the smallest act of cruelty can leave scars, but love can heal deeper than any wound. And if you're watching this right now, I want you to remember that we all carry battles unseen. So if this story moved you, please subscribe and join us here, because the world needs more voices speaking up for those who can't, more reminders that kindness is the strongest force we have. My daughter may have been left bald by someone's cruelty, but she stands today taller, braver, and stronger than ever. And that, more than anything, is the ending she deserved.